cut to the chase. This is a brief clip from the YoJoe Show Podcast, where we dive into everything: politics, tech, aviation, space, science, health, and medicine. Stick around for conversation that clips right to what matters.
This morning, I got the latest numbers from CDC that 76.4% of Americans now have a chronic disease. This is stunning. When my uncle was president, it was 11%. 1950, it was 3%. Today, it's 76.4%. 8 out of 10 of our kids cannot qualify for military service. This is a national security issue. When my uncle was president, we spent zero on chronic disease. Today, we spend $1.3 trillion. It's the biggest cause. It's increasing. And all of the arguments that Republicans and Democrats have about single payer, Obamacare, or with the various ways to allocate the health dollars, they're all like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. If we don't end this chronic disease, we are the sickest country in the world. That's why we have to fire people at CDC. They did not do their job. This was their job to keep us healthy.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
I need to fire some of those people to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Secretary Kennedy offered to the concept of freeing parents to work out what they want for their kids with their doctors. That seems like a self-evident, obvious thing you would do. But in the modern era, you're crossing the Rubicon. You know, how could you possibly do that? I think that was the right decision there. But if people don't get, noisy about it, then folks who aren't paying attention to this is.
So we're nearing 80% of the population being diagnosed with some chronic illness, much of it's type 2 diabetes. 8 out of 10 kids can't successfully enter a uniformed military service because they're physically incapable. It's unheard of. And it doesn't take much to connect the dots and say, if you think about it, there's drug companies like Pfizer. They've been around, I think, 175 years. They've never cured a disease ever. So the money for all, and it's not knocking that one particular company, they're all the same. The idea being that these companies derive the most amount of revenue from recurring revenue with treating illness. Treating illness is chronic illness. That's the best kind for the business market, is something that they diagnose you with and they tell you have it the rest of your life and they got to keep treating you. And that's where we've come to. The industry of treating chronic disease is so profitable and is making so much money. And yes, that's the more important question. Just like we talked about these other things where the politicians don't talk about what's really the problem. It isn't even, if you really go back, health insurance in the United States was what's called a major medical plan. You didn't get coverage to go to the doctor for routine physicals. You paid for that. It was only if something really catastrophic happened, you had that coverage. It wasn't until later that we started having policies that would cover for every little last thing. And they basically had tentacles like an octopus around you, controlling everything you do and all the tests you do. And then everyone wanted you to run 6,000 tests to triple check if you have something, because they wanted to find something wrong with it. The money is in finding something wrong. It's like when you take your car into the mechanic and they say there's a free 15-point inspection. Why do you think they're doing that? Because they're being nice? No, they're looking for something wrong. They're hopeful that there's something. They can say, you came in for your brakes, but I saw this other thing, and that's all. The brakes are like X, but this other thing's $5,000, and you really need it. Now, you could argue that there's a benefit to catching a problem with your car, true, and it's a benefit in catching something with your health. But the problem is there's some blurred lines in the middle of all of that. So that's the first thing that is really the theme of kind of what's being discussed now, and that is chronic illness has to be reversed. And major steps are being taken, including getting rid of people at the Centers for Disease Control here in the United States, which have not done a very good job of controlling disease. And then the second, well, with Dr. Oz, Mohammed Oz, he's basically talking about how the current administration is trying to empower parents to work with their doctors so that vaccine schedules and so forth aren't being imposed on the parents and the children, that there's discussions and that what's appropriate for a child is what's being given to that child. So that's what that was about. It was just a very short clip to just put that out there. And I think that as we move into the new year, we'll see more and more of this sort of theme in healthcare and in managing healthcare, not just the noise and talking points of the doctors, because my health insurance went up dramatically, insanely this year as well. it's going to keep going up. And for what? Let's make people healthy. Let's reduce the costs of healthcare, because if people aren't all sick, the healthcare costs can't be justified being that high. And hopefully in the new year, we'll see some more of that.
I think obviously we've touched on this in the past. Health costs in the United States are completely BS. They're made up, they're random. It's a scam to take money from the insurance companies and really from the US government, who's the largest insurer through Medicare or Medicaid. Like you said, back in the day, people paid to go to the doctor on their own. That's when a doctor visit cost a few dollars, not a few $100s. Nowadays, every doctor visit is a few $100s, and then every test they run is another few $100s, and before you're paying thousands of dollars. So no wonder why people need insurance, but then the whole insurance industry is a scam from start to finish, unfortunately.
Doesn't need to be. That's the
It
whole
really
thing.
doesn't.
And I'd like to do an in focus episode someday, even on the diagnostic industry. The costs are so high because there's all these tests being done, many of which may actually be causing illness, cancer, and so forth. Again, you don't want to run needless tests just to do it. Everything has a potential risk, and these aren't often being properly discussed with the patient. That being said, I think we have to, as we move into the new year, just think about what is important. And sometimes the most important things are elucidated not by the medical experts, but by people that just have a good head on their shoulders. Let's take a quick look at this.
Yeah, just to finish up, I think that Americans are chronically ill because of the foods Americans eat, which is way worse than the foods that Canadians eat, which is worse than the food that Europeans eat, which is worse than food that kind of indigenous people eat. So obviously, our modern food industry is delicious, but it really is poison. Hopefully, he fires a whole bunch of people in the FDA as well.
Listen, we've been discussing that ad nauseum. Bottom line is, the nutrition, quote unquote, industry, the food industry, the processed food industry, all of this has caused, in large part, all the chronic disease that we have. Okay, it's been caused by that. So we can't talk about one without the other. So I totally agree. But like I said, sometimes the people that know the most about the most common sense, basic advice aren't even these medical experts. Let's take a look.
When I was in high school, I really only had two things on my mind: girls and cars. and I wasn't doing very well with girls, so we'll talk about cars. But let's just imagine that when we finish, I'm going to let each one of you pick out the car of your choice. Sounds good, doesn't it? Pick it out, any color, you name it. It'll be tied up with a bow, and it'll be at your house tomorrow. And you say, well, what's the catch? And the catch is that it's the only car you're going to get in your lifetime. Now, what are you going to do knowing that that's the only car you're ever going to have and you love that car? You're going to take care of it like you cannot believe. Now, what I'd like to suggest, you're not going to get only one car in your lifetime, but you're going to get one body and one mind, and that's all you're going to get. And that body and mind feels terrific now, but it has to last you a lifetime.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a very important message by Warren Buffett. It is a little ironic coming from Warren Buffett because Warren Buffett is notoriously unhealthy. He drinks like 5 Cokes a day. He's the owner of a huge part of Coca-Cola. He eats a McDonald's breakfast every single day, and then depending on how the stock market is doing, that kind of chooses what he eats at McDonald's. He eats a lot of salt, but salt isn't as unhealthy as we were told, as long as you consume enough water to compensate for. He eats a lot of chips and sticks and candies, and he owns Dairy Queen. He goes to Dairy Queen every day eating ice cream and blizzards and sundaes. He eats steak and fries all the time, so he's notoriously unhealthy. He also notoriously drives, not notoriously, but drives supposedly the same car he's been driving for 50 years, lives in the same house with the same wife. So a lot of inspiration. Maybe he won the genetic lottery, not just in terms of brains and success, but in terms of health genes as well, because the guy's 94 and he's still beating. So it's really impressive.
I think he just turned 95, and his net worth is about $1 billion per year. So he's about 90, somewhere near in the neighborhood of $95 billion, his net worth. And yeah, listen, his advice is sage advice. That's how we should approach life. If you could get away with smoking cigars like George Burns, who lived to be like 100 or whatever, an actor many years ago, or you can drink a Coca-Cola or do whatever. These are things that are negatives, but some people can get away with that, okay? There was, and we mentioned this on a prior episode, where there was a guy named Jim Fixx. He was a famous runner, and he died at a young age of a heart attack, and people were like, oh, look, running's bad for you. And it's not that. It's that maybe if you hadn't been so physically fit, the genetic predisposition he had perhaps to that to the heart attack would have killed him at a much earlier age even. Okay, so everyone's a little different, and he's just giving the correct answer to everyone. Do the best you can to take care of your body and your mind, because until such time we come up with some other way, this is all you get. And you just have to approach life that way. Why would you take such bad care of yourself when there's no replacement? And the problem is, like he says, talking to high school kids, when you're young, you don't think about this stuff. You think you're invincible. You don't worry about it. When you're 20, maybe even 30, you don't think about it. But as you get older and you start having friends around you getting sick and dying and so forth, and actors that you grew up with dying of old age and so forth, you start looking at the world very differently. He's an old man and yet super successful. He has everything at his fingertips. And he's just basically trying to give some advice that maybe will be valuable. So with that, kudos to him. And I think if our medical professionals were smart as he was, just basically giving the right advice, people might be healthier.
We hope you found our clip segment informative. For more content, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and watch the full episode.